Ted came to Nigeria back in 1970 or 71, something like that. I don't remember the exact date. He came with Sam Rowan, and they did a seminar on theological education by extension and program instruction. And Ted did the PI, the program instruction seminar. And out of that came a whole bunch of program instruction textbooks for theological education in Africa. And so I worked with the Nigerian, Samuel Kure, and we wrote a book together called Powerful Bible Teaching that basically Ted, he would check how we were writing frames. I don't know if you remember how writing frames, but you write all these frames. But the thing that struck me about Ted was that he was a real forward thinker in asking real hard questions on how content related to life. And this is where I first heard about the rail fence. He and Sam Rowan were talking about the rail fence with the top rail, what they called cognitive input, and the bottom rail called field experience. And he said the key job of the educator is to tie the two together with fence posts. Well, I never thought of that, and this was a radical idea for me, and I was writing Christian education curriculum for the evangelical churches of West Africa. So while Ted and Sam were still there, I wrote an article for Evangelical Missions Quarterly on the rail fence metaphor for revitalizing Sunday school. And I gave Ted and Sam a footnote, but I basically remind Ted all the time that I was the first one to put into print his model. And so I gave him credit. But that was a radical idea for me, because all along I knew that the Bible should relate to life. But here was a model I could use for showing people. And so it not only helped us to rethink theological education, but it became sort of a model for almost everything I teach. And in fact, my students are basically saying now that everything I teach is a rail fence. I say, I'm going to teach you theories of curriculum, theories of leadership, but you've got to show me how this relates to experience. And so this was a key part of it. At that time, I was interested in doing doctoral studies in anthropology. And Ted said, why don't you come to Michigan State and study ethnopedagogy? Now, I never heard of ethnopedagogy, but I said, okay, what's that? And he talked about how culture relates to how we teach. And as I was continuing to write materials, I realized that a lot of the program instruction stuff I was writing it in a brilliant way, but the people that were field testing it with didn't get it at all. And so I said, there's something wrong with these people. They don't understand my brilliant writing. Until it occurred to me, maybe I don't understand these people. Maybe it's my fault. And so that's what led me to Michigan State to study with Ted. And it was just an amazing, life-changing experience to be in class constantly with Ted. Office hours with him. He was the chairman of my doctoral committee. He was the chairman of my dissertation committee. He'd have us over as students. These were Ted's students at Michigan State. Have us over in the evening. About once a month. We'd go over to his house. And we just sit around and talk about what we're learning and how it relates to the Bible, how it relates to the gospel, how it relates to missions. It's just an amazing experience at a secular university to have someone like that to help us to integrate theology with the social sciences. Delightful time. I remember once when I was there, Ted had to do a seminar at Malone College with the faculty. And so he said to me, do you want to come with me? And I said, sure. So he said, okay, you ride with me, it won't cost anything. You can stay in my motel room so that you won't have to pay anything there. And if it costs anything, I will pay for it out of my honorarium that they're going to give me. I was just astounded. So here I was, just a young kid, is working with the guru at Michigan State University, and he invited me to go with him. So we spent the whole time driving to Malone College, asking him questions. I actually tape recorded what he had to say, because I wanted every word. So I have this tape of asking him questions about what happened, and talked about how to lead the seminar. And I watched him lead this seminar at Malone College. And I realized after the first hour or two, the faculty at Malone were really frustrated. And he came back that night and I said, Ted, are you going to change your mind on this? Are you going to change your agenda in order to get rid of some of the frustration? He said, oh no, that was intended. And sure enough, is this the whole idea of people learn through disequilibration. I said, Ted, are you disequilibrating them too much? And he said, no, the technique is to rock the boat, but don't tip it over. And so it just comes back and forth on this one as how it works with how to bring about change as you get people thinking. You don't get them too angry, but you get them riled up enough so that they begin to think of what's going on. And I just look at that, how he spent time with students, but also how he debriefed with me what he was doing at Michigan State. Just a delightful experience. As we've continued on, it's been amazing for me to watch how Ted thought, because he changed his philosophy of teaching in several ways. When he was into the behavioral objectives kind of thing for program instruction, he was really into this. He said, you need to write frames, you need to write the terminal objective for every frame. And so I really bought into this. So I got to Michigan State and he said, no, I'm not into that anymore. I'm more into simulations. And he was into values clarification for a while. And I can remember saying, Ted, this is ungodly. He said, oh, but there's some common grace in here. And so I said to myself, this is the man who has a mind alert. He's just constantly asking questions. What are the new ideas? And he was willing to change paradigms when he came up with what he thought was a better idea. Then he got into some of the Piaget things and Kohlberg, and we actually invited Kohlberg to Michigan State to come and talk to our class on human development. And this was a life-changing thing to me, and that we need to help people to grow. The goal of education isn't covering material, but fostering the development of people. And I look at that and say, this is amazing, seeing this in Ted and seeing his mind change from a program instruction model to a values clarification, to a values development, to a human development model. He's changed his mind since then a little bit as well. But you look at that and you say, this is a mind alert. And I think Ted's key contribution is the fact that he challenged so many students to think hard about what's going on and evaluate it and reflect on it and bring about change, but not in a radical, rebellious way where we tip the boat over, but to rock it enough. And so I did this with my students today. I said, we need a new way to look at leadership, especially in a cross-cultural setting. And class member after class member in my class today said, yeah, but if we do that, no one will agree with us. We'll upset the apple cart too much. And so I quoted Ted Ward in my class just a few minutes ago. I said, now you rock the boat, but you don't tip it over. And so one gal said, but my missions committee in my church won't like this. I said, okay, ask them some questions about where to go next. I said to myself, how would Ted Ward answer this question? And so it's just a powerful influence on my teaching right now. You know, the thing that struck me, even as a young student, he saw me almost as a colleague. It was amazing. Taking me to Malone College and explaining what he was doing. He didn't introduce me at Malone College to the faculty as, this is one of my students. He said, this is one of my colleagues at Michigan State. And so I think he's always treated his students that way, not as incompetent learners, but as fellow learners. And I think that's fascinating. But you're right, over the years, Ted and Margaret and my wife and I have spent a lot of time together. Just a couple weeks ago to the Chicago Botanical Gardens, and we compare notes on photography and flowers, and it's just a lovely friendship relationship at this point. You know, one of the first times he came to Africa, came to Nigeria where we were living at the time, he went to Theological College of Northern Nigeria, and he was trying to gather data on culture and cognition. And so he handed out a paper pencil test, and he handed it out to all the students in the class, and I was there with him. And he said, now, what I want you to do is to fill this thing out by yourselves. Don't cheat and look at everyone else's paper, but don't cheat, but fill this thing out. So he said, okay, go. And as soon as he said go, all the students started talking with each other and helping one another. And I could see Ted was frustrated. He said, what's going on here? He said, stop, stop, stop. And he came all the way out here to gather the data, and now his instrument was falling apart. So he said, stop now, don't cheat, don't cheat. He said, okay, start over again on question number 2, go. And they all started talking to each other. And so finally Ted said, wait a minute, stop, what's going on here? And one man in the back, and I was sitting 2 rows over from him, he stood up and he said, sir, to cheat is to withhold information from your brother who needs it. And Ted was saying, oh, okay. And so the whole idea of what does cheating mean in a collectivistic society is opposite of what it means in an individualistic society. And so Ted still uses, in fact, I saw that example in one of his books. And he comes to me occasionally and says, is that true? Did that happen? I said, yeah, that happened. I saw it. And I think he's constantly been learning about culture and about how it works. The thing that I noticed when he was in Nigeria is that he would stop and talk with people, everybody. I mean, the kid that worked on our yard, probably 14 years old, he sat down and talked with this kid for a while. And I said, wait a minute, now here's an esteemed university professor talking with a kid that hardly knows English. And he's just working on the yard as a day laborer, and Ted sat down and talked with him. But this reflects, I think, his idea of the dignity of persons. It doesn't matter how much education you have, you're a valuable person in God's eyes and in my eyes. I looked at that and said, isn't this wonderful? But yeah, in some ways we had debates. I would argue with him. See, I was a Christian ed major at Wheaton, and he was really pretty much against Sunday school and all these things. He's famous for the term, Christian education is neither Christian nor educational. And I studied with Lois LeBar, and he really didn't have a lot of things. He thought this was the old-fashioned Christian ed, Sunday school, pipe cleaners, stars on the chart kind of stuff. And as I talked with him, I said, Ted, this is not what Lois LeBar is saying. Lois LeBar was really a fan of John Dewey, but she hated to admit it. And how she talked about we need to start with the student and with the needs of the student. And Ted said, oh no, it's bad. I said, Ted, it's not, it's good. And so we had debates on that, on is the field of Christian education revivable? And so that was one area where we've constantly had debates. The other thing I did in Africa was help to set up the Accrediting Council for Theological Education in Africa. And Ted never had anything good to say about accreditation. It was always something that ruined the educational process. So I debated with Ted. I said, Ted, what if we could set up an accrediting association that would force teachers to ask the questions, how does this content relate to the needs of Africa? And I was honored that one day he said, accreditation is horrible. It does more harm than good. He said, the only person that's made an argument to make sense on accreditation is Jim Plueddemann. And so that the fact that as we debated this, he still didn't really agree with me, but he admitted I had an argument that made sense. And so there's several things over the years that we've constantly debated. I don't know if I've convinced him, but he's such a gracious man. He listened and he tried hard to figure out what I was saying and to figure out whether I'd right or not. I just admire him for that. I can tell you some jokes we played on him if you want to hear that.
Oh yes, please.
Okay. He was on his way to East Africa and South Africa to do some of these seminars with Sam Rowan. And he was going to a very conservative, religious conservative, where they don't drink or dance or anything like that. And so we were at our house one night playing cards. And Sam Rowan was showing us some card tricks, and Ted was there, and so we were having the best time playing cards. And so I took the cards, and these guys left and went home, but I then snuck into Ted's room where he was staying in the guest house. And I put these cards everywhere, in his Bible, in all of his books that he was handing out, in every pocket that he had, and I just stuck them everywhere. And so I sent a letter then ahead, and I said, Ted has an amazing way to illustrate educational principles. And I said that there are 52 factors in educational principles. You need to ask him about these 52 factors. And Ted didn't know I was doing this. So everywhere Ted got, they were saying, what are these 52 factors in education? That's it. I don't know. He'd open up the cards and the jack would fall out. He'd open up another book and an ace would fall out. And the whole time in these hyper-conservative kinds of circles, here he was playing cards all over the place. And people are asking, what are these 52 variables in education? He hasn't forgiven me on that one. And but here's the thing. It was interesting that, again, as a young missionary, looking at this person who was a guru in the field, I felt free enough after spending an evening with them to play a joke on them. And again, I think it points out both our fun relationship we've had right from the start as almost colleagues and friends rather than the typical teacher-student kind of relationship.